Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thank you so much for joining us. Some New Orleans neighborhoods were in the news this week. In the east, proposals to redevelop the former Six Flags site were narrowed down to two. On the West Bank and on the lakefront, there are plans to redevelop Algiers Point and West End, respectively. Throughout the city, there are high-profile blighted property areas in need of action, and in too many neighborhoods, crime seems to be spiking. We'll look at these stories tonight, plus a major development in the COVID war, as the Centers for Disease Control eased guidelines for wearing masks. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Jessica Wiliams, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Danny Monteverde, reporter, WWL Tv, Channel 4, and Mike Perlstein, investigative reporter, WWL Tv, Channel 4. All right, we're going to go over to E first for the latest on COVID and what's up with the masks.
Well, a fairly big surprise, I think, as far as a lot of people are concerned. You know, I remember a year ago this past March, a relative was told that by her employer that for the time being she'd have to work from home. And they said, well, when are we going to be back in the office? And he said, well, possibly by June. And she was shocked. And he was talking about June 2020. That seemed like a long time ago. And still here it is. Now we're on the verge of June 2021. And maybe things are about to loosen up. Still doesn't mean you're going back to the offices, though. But at least the mask thing has been dealt with, at least partially. On Thursday, the federal government, the CDC, came out and fairly blatantly said, if you got your vaccinations, then you have a lot more flexibility. You don't have to wear your mask outdoors or indoors. There are certain restrictions, but as a rule, if you have the vaccinations, you can stop wearing them. To emphasize this, the president had a press conference. He told everybody to take their mask off, and he did it. I think it's the first time I've seen Joe Biden without a mask, what we look like him. And so it was sort of a refreshing day, but really surprised everybody. Because anytime there's been these sort of like rulings, then the city comes back and says, well, not so fast, we're going to delay this. If you'd go in the Harris Casino and put a bet, I think anyone would have said, well, the city is not going to do anything yet. But they did. That today the city went ahead, the Cantrell administration, to follow these guidelines. And so essentially, if you've got your vaccines, then you don't have to wear a mask outdoors or indoors. There are some exceptions. City buildings, you got to wear them in city buildings, K through 12, and in public transit. So if a 12th grader is going to City Hall and taking a streetcar, they need to wear their masks. But otherwise than that, it looks like it's fairly open. And maybe this will encourage those who haven't gotten their vaccines to hurry up and do it. Now, this is really totally honor system. I mean, how are you going to tell if someone's wearing their mask or not? I guess they need to provide some sort of proof if asked.
You mean if it has been vaccinated or not? Yeah.
Yeah, the vaccination. But it's a good moment in terms of this whole plight that we've been living for over a year and a half. It's a major development.
Yeah, as the CDC said, if you want to sort of get back to what your life was before, vaccination is the way to do it. But there's still a lot of hesitancy out there.
Well, there always will be, but I think increasingly it's not taking people long to get used to the idea of things being a little bit more loose than they used to be. And when they truly are, I think it'll make a difference. To me, the key month, and I've been saying, is October, because that's when things really start to happen in the city. The Jazz Fest and the French Quarter Fest and the football season. If all of this is cleared out by then, and if people can be living a normal life, I think that's going to be a really good sign.
Well, we're looking forward to that time, aren't we? We're getting edging closer to it. All righty, thanks a lot. Mike, there's a real problem in the city with violent crime, and we see shootings up, murders up, carjackings, including one just recently with a little baby in the car. What's the city going to do about this?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. I don't think the city has enunciated a clear plan. This would obviously fall predominantly on the New Orleans Police Department. Yeah. But we do hear talk of looking at sort of the whole spectrum of possible solutions to combat violent crime. We certainly had a uptick in almost all the major violent crime categories in 2020. There were some elements to that, such as the pandemic lockdown, kids not being in school. Well, so far, for several months of 2021, worse. and not just a little worse, but significantly worse than last year. And that's a problem. There's another underlying element that the statistics are starting to bear out, which is the age of many of the offenders are younger and younger. And so many of the very, very recent cases we've seen, like the carjacking you mentioned, with the child in a child seat in the car, are at the hands of juveniles. And that is a particularly troubling problem and exponentially more difficult to deal with. We've heard Police Chief Sean Ferguson, we probably heard from him more very recently in the past month than we have in quite a long time, almost to the breaking point of frustration on what to do. He sees his police officers arresting the same juveniles over and over again. The juvenile justice system is not necessarily designed or built out to hold many juveniles in custody. There are supposedly other measures, ankle monitors, home incarceration, but what there are not are programs to plug these kids into to keep down the recidivism. That's what the police chief is seeing. It's been tricky for news media because juveniles' identities are kept private, and for the most part we don't have access to those records. It would be, I think, much easier to actually track individual cases to demand more answers of the system if the media and public had the ability to do that. But clearly it's already a bad problem. New Orleans traditionally, as we know, has disproportionate amount of violent crime. When the trend among offenders is younger and younger, that really becomes almost an intractable problem.
And in the accident last week after the chase, and 7 teenagers involved, right? I think it was 7 in the car.
Correct. 2
the chief was
young
so
girls
frustrated.
and 5 young boys.
On the scene, the chief was so frustrated, saying, we've arrested some of these people over and over again.
And I can tell you, just cops on the beat, they're the ones who know first. Like, I just arrested that guy last week, and they see either a new arrest or, in this case, several of the people involved in that terrible accident, the 2 girls involved still in the hospital. Yeah. I think 4 of the boys are out and have been arrested. So the officers know full well. The chief obviously gets that information and has expressed frustration, but he's taken it to like a certain line that he will not cross, which is to specifically call out elements of the criminal justice system, of which he is a part. Obviously, he's frustrated, and we've asked him, and I have specifically asked at press conferences, okay, where are you pointing the finger? Where's the weak link? He won't talk about the juvenile court judges, or the bail system. Obviously, there's this is compounded by an issue of criminal justice reform, which was obviously badly needed in New Orleans, but some of those things were enacted very rapidly, such as a movement to eliminate or greatly reduce bail amounts, for example, so that we see multiple arrests of, sometimes somebody is released on a bail, arrested the next day, which is going to be frustrating to the police officer who's just, arresting the same sort of customer over and over again.
Well, we heard the superintendent also, I think this week, really just make a plea to families, to guardians, to parents. Keep an eye on your kids. Make sure you know what they're doing.
Right, and regardless of the, individual trends, and obviously pandemic, kids not, many of them not being back in school yet, are all, feeding this spike right now. The age-old problem are all of the socioeconomic issues that feed these problems. Obviously, we have a disproportionate amount of poverty in New Orleans, and a concentration of poverty, and fractured families, some poor role models, and those are the problems for sociologists and the community as a whole. And we often hear the mayor, Latoya Cantrell, talk about holistic solutions, and it's fine to speak about the need for that, but in the case of juvenile justice, for example, you need money and you need programs specifically to plug these kids into so that we do not see them go through this revolving door. And by the way, it does not serve the juvenile offenders to get hardened at such a young age, because all those juveniles ultimately, and most of them, we hope, become adults and the system and the repercussions are much more severe in the adult criminal justice system.
All right, Mike. Well, a problem definitely that needs to be worked on, but it is a really big concern for all members of the community. Thanks a lot, Mike. Jessica, over to you. Okay, now it's down to 2 in terms of redevelopment of the Six Flags site.
Yeah, slightly more positive news. The city this week decided to narrow down a field that had started out at 6 contenders to 2. This week we have the proposal of End Weston and Shield, which is a foundation that was started by Drew Brees, Josh Norman of the Buffalo Bills, and Demario Davis of the Saints. And that proposal wants to see an urban farm, a series of educational centers in New Orleans East to teach youth about aquaponics and agriculture, also a farm-to-table restaurant. And particularly one point of contention this week is that the proposal wanted to build a logistics hub and a transportation hub. And Drew Brees and the team that presented it really focused on the proposal's ability to be able to spark jobs in the area. Well, a ton of folks who wrote in, residents of New Orleans East and surrounding areas who remembered the Jazzland theme park and who wanted to see something a little bit similar to that entertainment use at the site, said, we don't want a farm, we don't want necessarily the transportation and logistics hub, we want to see the water park, we want to see an amusement park at the site. And so the city, when a lot of people at that meeting thought that they would go from 3 to 1 proposal, the city instead decided to go from 3 to 2. It's keeping in the running the proposal, the Bayou Phoenix proposal, which proposed that water park in addition to the logistics hub, a separate one that would be coming from that development team. And so now over the next month, the city's going to take a look at both proposals, and the Drew Brees' team has even said, we'll go back to the drawing board and add more entertainment uses if that is what the community wants. But we are committed to providing an employment center in New Orleans East.
Because the community would like to see a revenue generator and to bring more people to the east, right?
That's exactly right. And one of the things that city officials mentioned, one of the reasons why they wanted to see a job center is the hope that the daytime employment, what they call the daytime employment population in the East, the people who work there during the day, who can support the retail stores, a coffee shop, a sandwich shop that would pop up there, they would want to see something like that so that the retail would then follow. And what several folks on that call were saying is we want the jobs in the East, but we also want to have both things at the same time, essentially. We want to see the entertainment as well as the employment center. And that's what the city's considering right now.
Jessica, that site really hasn't done well as an entertainment site. I mean, remember Jazzland originally, and Jazzland didn't work out. Then Six Flags. Six Flags is a big national name, and Six Flags didn't work out. And I've always thought it has transportation problems between the 6 Mile Bridge and the high-rise bridge, and there's just not much proof that that's successful for locations for that kind of thing.
Well, Jazzland, as to your point, went bankrupt for I think about 2 seasons in operation, and then Six Flags, of course, took it over and had some successful seasons, but did not choose to come back after that site stood in floodwater for several months after the storm. But what they have proposed to do now is that transportation and logistics hub, and to your point, the area is actually well positioned for that type of, like an Amazon or a Walmart to come in and have their trucks coming in and out, because you can reach so many areas of the region from that one site. And so that's one thing that the city is considering in addition to the entertainment that folks say that they want to see.
Okay, so when are we going to find out?
Within a month.
Okay.
And the city's hoping to be able to have something online at the site over the next few years.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Denny, over to you. You did a series on blighted properties, big and small, in the city of New Orleans. What did you discover?
Big and small, and from Riverside to Lakeside, East Bank, West Bank, they're all over the place. Unfortunately, if there's some progress potentially coming at the Six Flags site, there's just probably countless other properties that are just sitting, many of them large and small. And so we did take a look at some of the big ones that were sitting around town to try to get some answers about what is or isn't, in many cases, happening. And we'll take a look at some of those now. One of them is actually over in Algiers. It's the old Brechtel golf course. You can see here it's really just nothing but kind of a dump site right now, weeds growing all over the place. This was a pretty popular course over in Algiers pre-Katrina. The storm came in, damaged the irrigation system, and here we are nearly 16 years later, and it's just sitting, kind of frustrating neighbors That's one big piece of, that's a city-owned property that's just sitting there for now. Another one we took a look at was what some people kind of call the Caveman Reader Hotel, and you might not know it by the name, but you know it if you see it. That's there right at the bend on I-10 in New Orleans East. For years, it just sat there. Again, another theme here, Katrina. Now, the good news is there's some progress happening here. It's being turned into some housing. They've now taken off that graffiti that said Caveman Reader there on those blocks that were spray painted. So there's some progress there, thankfully. Another high-profile place on the interstate was the site of the old Times-Picayune building that was torn down in 2019, and its place was going to be a drive shack. That's one of these high-tech Topgolf type of driving ranges, and you see it here. It's just kind of a mess right now. Almost as soon as the construction started, it stopped. Part of that was to blame, partly to blame rather, was a COVID shutdown. Then there have been lawsuits from contractors alleging they haven't been paid. Now, the attorney for the group that's doing this told the Industrial Development Board recently they hope to have things done by about 2023. So some progress there. Now, another big spot in the middle of the city, in mid-city actually, is the old Lindy Boggs Medical Center. You see it there. That is just right from Bayou St. John, and you can see it's just nothing but kind of a canvas for a graffiti artist is how we've described it. Sitting there, lots of frustration for the neighbors because there's no real answers from the owners right now.
And it's been there like that since Katrina, and it's big. It is a big eyesore.
And it is. And now, in fairness, we should say when we were there the other day doing the interview, after we wrapped up, they were actually bricking over a door, not just putting up a piece of plywood, literally putting cinder block bricks over it. The basement regularly floods. They were about to pump that out again. So there's some work happening there in that sense, but by and large, neighbors say not enough, not fast enough. And they say a lot of just empty promises right now. And another big one, another city-owned property, the Municipal Auditorium, again, sat vacant since Katrina. The city wants to turn it into a new city hall. They say they've got some money from FEMA funds to make that happen. The neighbors, they're not entirely sold on that. They say that, you know, there's a lot of concern about what a civic building could bring to the neighborhood. They say basically give it a little more time, and if you can find somewhere else, do it. Far from an exhaustive list here, but again, just indicative of some of the big blight around the city.
Well, you take a look at some neighborhoods too, just of houses that have been blighted and just you know, been such a concern for their neighbors.
Absolutely. There was one house we stopped at in the 1900 block of North Durgeois that's kind of near St. Aug, to give you a landmark. The neighbors had to look at this vacant, blighted, abandoned, rotting, deteriorating house infested with rats and rodents for 16 years, and just within the past few weeks did the city come and tear it down. But that's a whole other process. To do that, there is a long process to go through and get demolition approved or send something to a sheriff's auction. So it's a slow process, frustrating to neighbors, but a big problem nonetheless.
And it's been a problem that's been around for the city for really quite a while, with just tens of thousands of blighted properties. It's no easy fix.
No, exactly. It's not. I mean, to do basic renovations on a house alone, that's a lot of money. But when you're talking about repairing major buildings, you're talking, one architect I spoke to made a good point. He said, you're dealing with $50, $100, $150 million projects. There's a lot of times they need tax credits and those sort of incentives. But even on the smaller scale of a residential demolition, for example, you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars. And if the city has to come in and do that, the reality is they're just not flush with a lot of cash to make that happen. And so here we sit with a lot of these properties, again, vacant, commercial, residential, sitting and rotting. And
for some of the residential, the smaller properties, it's been hard sometimes to find out who really has title to it.
And that's the thing. Part of that big Byzantine process the city has to go through, they have to go find every single person who's got any sort of ownership interest in that property. Sometimes you get lucky and there's one person, but New Orleans being what it is, you know, everyone and their grandmother sometimes owns a property, and you've got to find all of them to let them know. And that's not an easy or quick process.
Because we have respect for property rights, so the city can't say, we don't like the way it looks, we're just going to go in and take it.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. You can own vacant property, but it's got to be kept up to certain standards, and that's where the problem comes in.
All right, Danny, thanks a lot. Great piece. Thank you. Okay, E, back over to you. I mean, we're on this sort of neighborhood and redevelopment theme right now. So another spot in the city of New Orleans, West End.
West End used to be a really, really popular place for seafood restaurants and, you know, view by the lake, and especially in the earlier days, a good place to get cool and have crabs. And by the way, there was a time when people went to eat seafood. They ate crabs and shrimp, and very seldom crawfish. Crawfish is sort of like a recent comer to this sort of thing. But West End was very popular. They had a few classic places, Brunnings and Fitzgerald's, and they were built out on piers. You can go and you can see the pelicans fly by and feel the vibrations from the water. Yeah. Basically, hurricanes did them in. Hurricane Georges hit Brunnings really hard, and then after Katrina, that whole area was just devastated. It was only a few blocks away where the levee broke that did most of the serious flooding for New Orleans, and so that was all torn down. And if you've ever been out there, they've built it's kind of like a dam sort of structure. It kind of reminds you of Hoover Dam. It's a big project to regulate the water, and so I don't think we'll ever have the same kind of problem we had just because of what was done. But now the problem is what to do with the area. It's right on the edge. I mean, it's right between a squiggly line between Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish, and sometimes there's a little bit of discussion. Well, which parish is this? But it's really between the both. The name West End is sort of New Orleans centric because it's the west end of Orleans Parish, even though it's the east end of Jefferson Parish. But anyway, the name West End prevails. But two of the council members who represent districts, Jennifer Van Vranken, who represents the Metairie side in Jefferson Parish, and Joe Giarrusso represents the Orleans Parish side, kind of led the way to have a cooperative endeavor agreement, which is pretty much of a statement of a process in which they're going to try to come up with a plan working between the two parishes to develop the two. One of the first steps is to have like a public hearing, but I can't imagine anything coming out of a public hearing other than a place where you're going to have restaurants and shopping and maybe some sort of recreation opportunities. To use it for anything else would probably not be a good use of that kind of picturesque type of space. And so that's the first thing, to develop a strategy and then to go ahead and develop it. One thing that will not happen is that there will not be buildings built on piers because of the safety precautions that they'll put there, and that won't happen. But that's a good thing to have. And then not far away is Breakwater Drive. Breakwater Drive is that road that runs along the edge of the lake out to the section that a lot of people remember as what's being called the Point. Right. And there's been a lot of development there, a bike trail, and they've put a berm along the area. And so the connection of Breakwater Drive with West End, could be a really nice place to go.
It would.
So the work goes on.
It certainly would be nice to go back out there and get a nice dinner. Fond memories of those days, right? Stuffed flounder.
Oh, stuffed flounder.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Eve, thanks a lot. Jessica, one more point, area of the city to talk about, Algiers Point.
That's right. Really over the past 5 years, Algiers Point has seen a surge of developers come in and build newer houses in the historic style, the 19th century architecture style that befits a lot of the houses in the Point. But newer houses, newer construction that's really being made available to people at a lower price point than, say, if they were looking to buy a home in the Garden District, if they were looking to buy a home in some of the other Mississippi River adjacent homes or neighborhoods on the east bank of the river. And that's really driven up property values. It's caused people who are opening up restaurants to think about starting locations there. They're looking at a new Barracuda, which has a location on Chapatulas, a new taco stand in Algiers Point. We saw Congregation Coffee Roasters open up within the past 2 years. There's also a Filipino restaurant there now. It's just really an area that's seeing a lot of growth in a really short time, but it's still available to people at a relatively less price point than the rest of the city in similarly composed neighborhoods.
Are there specific developers who have eyed this area and are coming up with certain plans to develop chunks of it?
There are. So Inhab Homes is a developer that has come in and has redeveloped a part of the point around Patterson and Atlantic, dubbed as Patterson Point. And those are historic style 1- and 2-story homes that are just beautiful. You can get a brand new home, but still in that same style as the historic architecture of New Orleans. Another developer has built what are called the Maritimes, close to that Patterson area as well. And we're even seeing other smaller companies sort of sprout up around those bigger subdivisions to be able to get in on some of the interest there. I actually talked to someone this week who just moved in a house on Elmira in the Point came down from Tennessee after being a longtime lover of New Orleans and just said, this is where we're going to be. We're, a ferry's ride away from all of the action in the French Quarter in downtown, but we can still just cross over the Mississippi River and enjoy our peace and our quiet in our neighborhood. When she moved in, the couple's name is the Rambos, and when they moved in, the house that they lived in was the only house on the block, and everything else was green space cleared through to the corner and almost to the line of sight to the levee. Now there are houses going up. Really, it seemed like it was overnight, but she's only been there since October, and since that time, she's got new neighbors. She's got new houses that are going in the ground. Foundations are being poured. It's just a bustle of activity over there.
It really does sound exciting. There's some condos also, right, that are going to be in the lower price range?
That's right. So David Fuselier is actually building what's called workforce housing. He's hoping to be able to clear all of that out. There was a former site where it used to be a steam locomotive manufacturing facility. It was a brownfield, so for several years it was contaminated, but recently had a lot of the contaminated soil excavated. And it looks like he is planning to build about 200 what's called workforce housing condos, which will be marketed to people that make about a median income or a little bit less than that. And in addition to that, he would have about 24 single-family homes that he would build, and a grocery store, which the Point doesn't really have anymore, although they used to have a ton of grocery stores, little corner sort of mom and pop shops, but this would be the first grocery store in quite a while. In addition to that, a bar and a rooftop restaurant.
Okay, well, a lot going on over there. Really exciting. Thanks a lot, Jessica. Round table now. Other stories. E.
Okay, well, to get your vaccinations, there's at least one place that's offering free crawfish to anybody that goes and gets vaccination. Be aware, though, that the crawfish season is coming to an end. Usually it goes to about June. Already the shells are starting to turn a little bit hard, which shows you're getting to the end of the season. So if you want crawfish, if you want a vaccination, do it now.
All right, good advice. Mike.
Well, I did a series on the Krewe of Nix, and that is a story that is going to play out very publicly, peeling the curtain back from the inside workings and controversies of a carnival crew with a class action lawsuit against the crew captain, Julie Lee, by many former members who bailed.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Danny.
Well, it was another boil advisory here in New Orleans this week. The City Council isn't happy with that. There's a little bit of finger pointing between Entergy and Sewage and Water Board. So on Tuesday at 10 a.m., the City Council is hauling both agencies in front of them to try to get some answers about what happened and why. So Tuesday at 10 a.m.
All right. Jessica?
Within the next 2 weeks, the City Council is expected to take up legislation that would more fully decriminalize marijuana in New Orleans. Helena Moreno is leading that charge, and we should hear more about it just in a couple weeks.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining us, and thank you all for joining us, too. And we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening. Bye, guys.